Hello everyone. In this video I will discuss one of the films called Knock at the Cabin. And never forget that I always pray for you and your family to be happy and healthy always. The film begins with a little girl named Wenling, commonly called Wen, busy observing some insects. Suddenly a big man named Leonard approaches her and introduces himself. He even tries to help Wen catch some grasshoppers, but when Leonard notices some other people approaching with weapons, he instructs Wen to call her parents, because the four of them have a very important job: to save the world. Hearing this, Wen, with a frightened face, runs towards the house, warning her two fathers, Andrew and Eric, that some strange people are trying to enter their cabin. Shortly after, they hear someone knocking on the door, which makes them all worried that the people might be evil and attempting to rob them. Despite this, Eric tries to remain calm and tells Andrew to leave immediately. When Andrew realizes that the mysterious people are armed, he plans to call the police, but unfortunately the telephone cable has been cut by Leonard and his friends. Leonard then asks them to open the door because they have come only to talk, not to rob or steal. However, Andrew and Eric refuse to open the door, so Leonard has no choice but to force his way in. When one of the women manages to break in, Eric tries to fight her, while Andrew attempts to restrain another intruder. After Leonard breaks in successfully, he asks Andrew to stop all this. Eventually, they subdue Eric and Andrew by tying them to chairs, and it seems Eric has suffered a concussion from falling and accidentally hitting his head on the floor. Initially, Eric and Andrew thought that Leonard and his companions were a group of people who strongly opposed same-sex couples, but it seems they don't care about that at all. They are even surprised to learn that Eric and Andrew are a couple. Leonard explains that they have come not to do harm, but to convey that they have had a vision of the apocalypse that will soon occur worldwide. Before continuing his explanation, Leonard asks his friends to introduce themselves first. However, for some reason, a man named Redmond suddenly refuses, believing that all they're doing is a waste of time. Despite this, Leonard tries to reassure Redmond because their goal here is not to do harm, but to convince Eric and Andrew to believe them, and the first step is to introduce themselves. Without delay, a nurse named Sabrina said that she came from a distant country and was willing to spend all her savings just to meet Wen, Eric, and Andrew. After Sabrina finished, Leonard began introducing himself, stating that he was from Chicago and worked as a school teacher and a basketball club coach. When Redmond talked about himself, he revealed that he worked as an employee of a company and had a dark past involving his dysfunctional family and a prison sentence. Lastly, a woman named Adrienne shared that she worked as a sous chef and was a cat lover who often fed stray cats. Their purpose for being there was not to do harm, but to prevent the apocalypse by sacrificing one of the inhabitants of the cabin, regardless of who it was. The three of them had to choose who would be the sacrifice for the project. But if they refused, they would be left to live forever, while witnessing the destruction of the world and remaining on the ruined earth. Despite sounding insane, Leonard tried to convince Andrew and Eric that what they were saying was true because they all had the same vision of the impending apocalypse worldwide. First, cities would begin to sink, and the oceans would rise, sweeping away all humans on the land. Second, there would be a plague, causing everyone to experience fever and lung damage. Third, humans would witness the sky collapsing like shattered glass. Fourth, God's fingers would come to scorch the earth. And finally, eternal darkness would envelop all regions of the world. After hearing Leonard's words, Andrew thought that Leonard and his friends were crazy people who hallucinated, so they firmly refused to be sacrificed because they did not believe in the apocalypse described by Leonard earlier. Realizing that Andrew and Eric refused to be sacrificed, Leonard was forced to carry out the task, as seen in their vision, to convince Andrew and Eric that they were serious about this. Initially, Andrew and Eric thought that Leonard planned to harm the three of them, but unexpectedly, Redmond stepped forward wearing a cloth over his head. Sabrina and Adrienne then immediately attacked with their weapons, and finally, Leonard swung his weapon, instantly causing Redmond to perish. In short, when they finished disposing of Redmond's body, Leonard immediately turned on the TV there. And shortly after, news appeared about an 8.5 magnitude earthquake that caused a tsunami in several regions. However, It seems that the government managed to evacuate everyone, and there were no casualties due to the disaster. Initially, they all thought that the apocalypse seemed not to have actually happened, but suddenly, a new report emerged about aftershocks in the coastal areas, causing a tsunami tens of meters high, instantly killing hundreds of thousands of people. Although they had witnessed how terrifying the recent catastrophic disaster was, Andrew still seemed to believe that everything Leonard said was a lie, while Eric appeared to be panicking as he began to believe that everything Leonard said was true. Leonard then stated that Eric and Andrew still had one more day before the next disaster occurred, so he hoped that they would choose wisely, because this concerned the safety of all mankind. Seeing Eric injured, Sabrina tried to treat the wound on Eric's head, and also briefly talked about how she used to not believe in the apocalypse. But since Sabrina had a vision of the terrifying apocalypse, she asked Eric to heed their words so they could prevent the apocalypse from annihilating all humanity. While everyone was engaged in their activities, Wen managed to sneak out of the cabin and try to hide among the trees outside. However, Leonard eventually found her, urging Wen not to do it again. After this incident, Andrew suddenly remembered his past, where he once had a problem with a man named Obenon, and apparently Obenon's face resembled Redmond's face, leading Andrew to believe that Leonard and the others were doing this deliberately to retaliate for past events. This made Adrian briefly believe Andrew's words because initially Redmond was the one who had informed them of the cabin's location. However, Leonard couldn't just stop because he was very confident that this cabin was exactly as he had seen in his vision. Andrew then accused Leonard of being nothing but a psychopath, so Leonard tried to tell about his students, who would soon participate in a basketball championship to represent their school. Leonard stated that the reason he had gone this far to stop the impending apocalypse was that he didn't want to lose the smiles on his students' faces. He was even willing to sacrifice his own life to save all of humanity. The next day, before Leonard asked Eric and Andrew again about who would be the sacrificial project, Andrew tried to convince them that Leonard and his companions were just hallucinating. Unbeknownst to them, Andrew was trying to distract us so Wen could untie the ropes around Eric's hands. Shortly after, when Adriana's turn came, she tried to convince either Eric or Andrew to be the sacrificial project. She even recounted why she believed so much in this vision. In her vision, she had seen her son's death hundreds of times, and she could still hear the repeated screams in her head. Although Eric was touched by Adriana's story, he still couldn't readily believe their words. So without delay, Adriana put on the head covering as Redmond had done before. In short, after cleaning up Adriana's body, Leonard immediately turned on the TV, where they saw news about a deadly flu epidemic spreading in several regions of America, Africa, and Europe. It seemed the flu was highly contagious among children under 10 years old, and within a few hours, it had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, mostly children. Seeing this, Eric suddenly told Andrew that he seemed to start believing Leonard's words because, when they were about to end Redmond earlier, Eric had seen a light standing behind them. Upon hearing Eric's words, Andrew tried to convince Eric that he was just hallucinating because of his head injury. He also accused all TV shows about the epidemic of being staged because Leonard always checked his watch before executing. Shortly after, for some reason, Wen suddenly started screaming, saying she wanted to watch cartoons. And while Leonard was distracted, Eric tried to divert their attention, while Andrew managed to free himself. He then ran out to get a weapon from his car. Sabrina tried to stop Andrew, but in the end, Andrew managed to get the weapon and point it at Sabrina until she fled from there. Andrew then aimed the weapon at Leonard, instructing him to stop all his crazy actions immediately. And if Leonard refused, he would shoot the weapon directly at Leonard's head. Unbeknownst to them, Sabrina suddenly approached them, which startled Andrew and led him to shoot Sabrina. Eventually, Leonard had no choice but to continue what he had to do to Sabrina's body, just as he had done to Redmond and Adrian before. While Leonard was cleaning up Sabrina's body, Andrew tried to take the business card from Redmond's wallet, and it turned out his guess was correct that Redmond's real name was Obenon, the person who had been involved in a previous altercation with him. Andrew then accused Leonard again of being a crazy psychopath who was willing to deceive someone for his own satisfaction, so Andrew tried to lock Leonard in the bathroom. but shortly afterward, they heard the sound of breaking glass from inside. Andrew thought Leonard had escaped through the window. However, unbeknownst to them, Leonard was hiding in the bathtub, and eventually Leonard managed to snatch the weapon from Andrew, although he was shot in the left arm. Leonard then asked them to turn on the TV, and there they saw an unimaginable disaster, where hundreds of planes suddenly crashed without any clear reason, causing millions of casualties in just a few minutes. Seeing this, Eric recalled Leonard's words where he had previously mentioned the sky collapsing like shattered glass, and this plane crash disaster looked very similar to shards of glass falling from the sky. Leonard then said that this disaster was supposed to happen one day later, but because Andrew had violated the rules, causing Sabrina's death, this apocalypse happened sooner than they had anticipated, and they had to quickly decide who would be the sacrificial project to stop this apocalypse. Unfortunately, Andrew refused Leonard's request again, and Leonard was forced to perform his final task, which was to kill himself to show that he had never lied about the apocalypse currently happening. But before doing that, Leonard briefly told Eric and Andrew about his vision, where after he saw all the disasters happen, for some reason, he could still hear people's screams, as Adriana had mentioned before. He said that after he died, Eric and Andrew only had a few minutes to choose who would be the sacrificial project before the final disaster occurred, and if they refused, they should prepare themselves because they would be the last humans to witness the destruction of the world. After saying everything, Leonard immediately attacked himself until he died, and shortly afterward, black clouds began to cover the entire sky, which made Andrew very scared because everything Leonard said was happening. When Andrew tried to enter the cabin, Eric said they couldn't just stand by, so he agreed to be the sacrificial project so they could immediately stop the disaster currently happening. Initially, Andrew didn't want to do it, but after seeing that Eric was very confident in his decision, he finally had no choice but to follow Eric's words, and he immediately shot his gun, causing Eric to die. After that incident, Andrew tried to take Wen away from there, but before they left, they saw that the cabin suddenly caught fire due to a lightning strike. On the way, Andrew took Wen to stop at a food stall, and there they saw many people watching news about the terrible disasters happening worldwide. But unbeknownst to them, the previous disasters suddenly began to disappear one by one, and even the news presenter mentioned that some planes had landed safely. When Andrew tried to check the car brought by Leonard, he finally realized that Leonard and his friends were always honest. He even saw a photo of Adriana with her son. Without further ado, Andrew immediately took Wen away from there to his parents' place in the city, and the movie ended. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.